Inspire Instructor Podcast, where the learning never stops. Welcome, you wonderful people, to our first episode of Season 2 of the Inspired Instructor Training Podcast. This season we'll be continuing to talk about all the competencies and rounding them off. And I'm adding some new feature where we're going to be asking guests a question around the hot topics in the industry and getting their thoughts. If you have any ideas on questions you'd like me to ask the guests, then please do send me a message and maybe we can bring them up in future episodes. I'm looking forward to Season 2. We've got some great guests lined up and it's going to be amazing. On this episode, we have my business partner and the better half of Inspired Instructor Training, Diana Todd, and we are going to discuss intensive courses. We dig a little bit more detail about Inspire Instructor Training, and also we talk about the competency. Was sufficient feedback given to help the pupil understand any safety critical incidents? So enjoy the show. So welcome to the podcast. On today's podcast, we have the other half of Inspire, maybe the better half, some would say. And so welcome, Diana, to the podcast, and look forward to hearing all your thoughts today.
Thank you for having me. I'm very excited to be here.
So this season on the podcast, I am starting off with a question that we sort of come up against on Facebook or within the industry, and trying to get you guys, you're just trainers' opinions on these things, because I think it can get a bit noisy on Facebook. So let me ask you this then: intensive courses, good or bad?
Ooh, I love them. I love them, but with a massive caveat to that. Now, first of all, and this goes into all the things that we say, what does intensive mean? Because intensive could be 8 hours a day, every day, Monday to Friday, do your test Friday night. I am not a fan of them for a couple of reasons. One, I think it's just too much. I think it's too much. I certainly don't have the brain capacity to do that. Second of all, I don't even think my husband could spend 40 hours in the car with me non-stop and I still come out with a reasonable relationship. I think it's too intense. Yes, it has a place, but I prefer semi-intensives. And what I mean by that is maybe, a triple lesson every day. And by triple lesson, I maybe mean like 2.5 hours or 3 hours a day with a little mini break. Now, what I like about them is the fact that not an awful lot of time is wasted in between that week that they're having a lesson. You don't have to recap as much in detail. There's no going back significantly because they've still got that muscle memory, and it just gels so nicely. The progress is significant, and I like the fact that the semi-intensives, maybe over 2-3 weeks, they have the opportunity there then to get exposure to different weather conditions. They can get exposure to different conditions of time as well. So, you could do nighttime lessons, you could do daytime lessons, etc. Harder in the summer, of course. But I especially find intensive courses beneficial to PDIs. I think it's great for them to work through that process of seeing the fault, fixing it, recognizing themselves how quickly the progress is happening with the pupil. And I think it helps fine tune their teaching skills as well, rather than waiting a week and even for them to recall what had happened last week and what they would do differently. You're only talking about yesterday, or the day before yesterday, as the case may be. So I'm a big fan. I'm a big fan. I also think it's a great way for you to top up your funds. So I use semi-intensives as a way of paying for any time off that I need. So I will tend to do like a little semi-intensive course before, half term, or after half term. Tend to be more proactive in that because, I like to have money in the bank. Um, so I think it's a good way. It's hard because obviously it's a big commitment and you need to make sure you're mentally prepared for that as well. And I also think if you manage it nicely, you can incorporate little breaks into it with your pupil. So that dead time that you would spend between going from one pupil's house to another pupil's house, you could suggest to the pupil, should we go for a 20-minute break? Let's have a little break. That's in your time anyway, so you would allow for that in the intensive. You could buy coffee and you get to know them, build that rapport, chat things through with them. Um, in terms of managing it, sorry, I've gone off on a tangent because I really do love them. It was probably a perfect question to ask me. In terms of managing it, I will always ask for a 50% non-refundable deposit up front when booking it because it's such a big commitment in your diary, and 50% non-refundable deposit in advance, 1 month in advance of starting. Again, so that that commitment is there from both parties. And for me, it's really important that you communicate as to what your expectations are and the risks involved, because it's all very well saying that the semi-intensive is there and, we are hopeful by the end of this period that you will be able to sit your test, but they just might not be ready. And that communication is paramount to it actually being successful, as long as everybody knows that this is what we're going to base it off, give or take. There might be a little bit of wiggle room in those lessons, and even just getting the tests as well. So making sure you have that opportunity to get the test in and around that course.
Yeah, actually, with the test thing, that's something that we tend to not have the test at the end of the course, maybe a week or 2 weeks later, because that does give you that wiggle room to chuck in some extra lessons if they need to, rather than this big, like, no, you can't do it, move it back. Also, it is quite hard sometimes to make, like, it's hard enough to make that call whether people's going to be ready or not.
Yep.
Anyway, but if they're doing four lessons, like 4 hours a day, it's suddenly like, oh, actually, you're going to make a lot of progress still. Are you going to be ready? And you're effectively having to make that decision quite a lot sooner than you normally would do it in regular lessons. So giving them that week can sometimes help, and then maybe an extra refresher like just before the week.
Yeah.
Um, I'm inclined to sort of kind of talk about some of the negatives just because you went full positive on them. Um,
I do have some negatives actually. If you
so I was just going to suggest that and you did say this about actually, as for the 3 week course, you can maybe cover some different weather conditions, but actually that's one of my negatives for an intensive, because if you're in the summer, for example, you aren't necessarily going to get as much rain or cold weather, or even just that winter sun that sort of sits in your face all day. I swear I wear my sunglasses more in the winter than I do in the summer. It's just like in your face all day. So I think that can be a disadvantage of not spreading it out. I also think there's an element of learners don't like they learn so much not in the car with you during their learning process. So if you're teaching someone for, I don't know, 20, 30 weeks, they're the whole time that they're learning to drive, every time they're in a car, they're suddenly seeing it differently to when they weren't learning to drive, and they're asking questions and they're talking to their friends about it, and maybe they're suddenly watching their TikTok feed suddenly becomes learner drivers because, I don't know, the phone was listening to them on a driving lesson. We won't get into that. But basically, it becomes part of their life for maybe 6 months. And I think that can be really, really good way of sort of learning. Like, I'm sure you've had learners turn up with questions and stuff that they've had from that week. And so I think you missed that on an intensive. I'm not saying don't do them, because there are lots of benefits and they certainly suit certain people as well. I also use them as well for things like refreshers. So when it's not a brand new person, maybe they failed a test and they're coming over and they want a refresher, or they've not driven for a couple of years and they want a refresher before taking a test. I think it can be quite suitable for that sort of kind of pupil as well. Do you do like an assessment lesson with them before?
Funny, we're so in tune with each other. I was literally chomping at the bit to say this. So I've just come off an assessment lesson for an intensive um at 7 o'clock this morning. And basically, yes, 100%, because that has to play a part. And when I met with this pupil, she's come from manual to auto. Um, and I'd said to her, we're looking at April, May, maybe before we can get her started. Um, and I said, let's rather than you waiting that long and then potentially having one lesson with me before starting, let's fit you in now, and we'll see what you like. And by the end of the hour and a half lesson, she was knackered. She was absolutely knackered. So we've now revised that. So this is what I mean in terms of it is no one size fits all. And now what I'm doing, or what we've suggested, is that we do one lesson every day before she goes to work or after, depending on her shifts. And then she's going to take the week off the next week, and we're going to break it down. So we'll do 3 hours, but with that break, like I'd said before. And then we're going to have a long break throughout the day and potentially do another one in the evening, just because it will not work for her to do any more than that. Like I say, she was flagging
Mm.
by the end of
Not
it.
like because you started at 7 o'clock in the morning, but
Well, she accidentally set her alarm as if she was going to work, so she got up at 5:30.
oh
So
wow. Oh, so she's used to the early starts. Okay, well, yeah.
So yeah, so absolutely we do an assessment. And I also think it's really important that you say to that pupil during that assessment, it is okay for you to decide I'm not the right instructor for you. I will help you find another one. Um, but for you to spend such a long time in the car with me in such a condensed period, um, it's really important that I speak in a language that makes sense to you and that you can see yourself getting on with me. Um, and of course, it's up to us to change our style, because I've said it before. We should be like little chameleons. We should adapt to what the pupil presents to us. But yeah, just make sure it's right for both of you before committing to
Mm.
doing as much as it's nice to get that nice
I think
injection.
it's also like an ability thing there as well on that first one that you can tell. There are some pupils that get in your car and you're like, yeah, this is going to take a while. That's not an intensive pupil. Don't don't do an intensive pupil like lessons with that pupil, because yeah, it's just going to put pressure on it, and it's not going to be the right sort of learning atmosphere for them. So it isn't for everyone, as well, and I think that's important to sort of kind of be aware of, and maybe that's where some of the big companies that sell intensives fall down, because they just sell the money. They want the money. They sell the course. They don't really care about the person. So this is why I think that assessment lesson is really crucial, before you take any money for an intensive. You just let's say, let me meet you. Let's have a lesson, and then we'll discuss the intensive and what's going to work best for you, because yeah, it just doesn't. It's not for everyone.
No, and I also think what you've just said there, that can be small companies too. I think that's down to the individual who's taken on the intensive. If your motives aren't right, regardless of the size of the company, then they're not right. That's it. It has to be right for the pupil. But interestingly, you said something earlier about the pupil um getting that experience, and as soon as you said it, over a course of like 30 weeks or what have you. Um, and I don't know if it's an auto thing or not. I certainly feel it more in an auto. I'm the opposite, because I find that when my pupils go away, it's not all of them by any manner of means, but some, when they go away for that week, they actually overthink it. So, you know, I've had pupils that will literally sit up in their bed with a steering wheel and pretend they're in a car turning the corner. And I've had pupils try and do reverse B parks on an app. Um, and then they come in and they're like, right, well, I've been doing this app, and if I do this with my finger and I do that, I'm like, and I tried the app, and I looked and I was like, I don't like this. I don't like this. It does not work. Um, so sometimes, yeah, it has to be right for the, but
I've played those reversing apps and I like them.
oh, well, you see, this is again why we complement each other, because we're just the right kind of sameness and the right kind of difference, I think, as well.
yeah. Um, yeah, no, I do have that. But then I would also suggest that those sort of pupils that sit up at night stressing about it, like to the level that you're talking about, probably wouldn't be okay for an intensive either, because they if they're anxious outside the car, they're probably going to be anxious inside the car. And my guess is those pupils you're talking about are probably taking a longer journey on learning to drive, so they're not going to get it done in that 3 weeks anyway. They maybe you do the 3 weeks to give them a big booster and get over that hurdle of the key like core skills. And then you carry it on going forward. And actually, that's another good point that we haven't really mentioned, that intensive don't have to have a test at the end of them. They can just be a Kickstarter to your learning journey. Maybe someone's got a week off holiday and they just want to do like a booster of lessons, but then carry on their weekly lessons following on from that. And that's absolutely fine as well. And maybe a better way around that process rather than putting the pressure on a driving test. So maybe it could be like a way to get started, or a bit in the middle, or a booster at the end. So it's flexible, I think, and make it work around what's suitable for the pupil, but also what's suitable for your diaries.
Yeah.
Because one thing my guys struggle with when I ask them to do an intensive is that, well, like, what do I do with my current pupils? And I think that can be challenging. Like if you're going to do like full week intensives, then in a way you kind of have to only do full week intensives, because otherwise every time you do one, your pupils miss a week's worth of lessons. And then what do you do when you haven't got a pupil that week, and so you're basically a whole week off? So I can see how that can be quite challenging to manage, which is why I think again it leans towards this maybe 2 or 3 week one, because you can fit your other pupils in and around that, and make it work. And maybe just work a bit, like you said, maybe just work a bit more one week because you've got to be going on holiday the week after or something like that. Okay, so moving on. Before we talk about our competency this week, let's talk about Inspire a little bit, as both of us are on here. It gives me an opportunity to talk more about it on the podcast. And I think it's quite strange that last time when I started season 1 on the podcast, Inspire didn't even exist. And now we have this company with lots of courses and workshops, and it's all super exciting. And I'm loving it. But
I am absolutely loving it. I love the fact that we just get to connect with so many instructors, and I just, do you know, we've said it time and time again, we bounce off each other. We are very good at telling each other when we've not quite got it right, and there's no sort of animosity over that.
I don't know. I go and have a paddy, but yeah.
Well, I'm quite like, yeah, that's fine. Yeah, okay. Um, yeah, and God, see, when I think about what we have done in the very short space of time that we have had, it's actually amazing. And I don't know if I'm allowed to say it's amazing. It's a bit big-headed, isn't it? I don't mean it like that. And I just think that the effort, the work, the investment in terms of our time, and making sure that the devil is in the detail with each and every single course that we've done, but not having it be 2 hours of just being spoken at. It's little bite-sized chunks. It's self-paced. it's informative. The detail is all there, but we cut the waffle. I mean, ironically enough, I know we can waffle for Britain, but I don't think we do that in the courses. And that's certainly been the feedback that we've got. People love the fact that the courses don't feel overwhelming. So sometimes when I am going to do CPD, I find it really, I find it overwhelming when there's too much on there already. I don't know where to start. I don't know what to do. And I like the fact that we almost have a roadmap with the fact we've got the Zooms and the courses that we've put on there already. There's a roadmap that we prioritize the key things that people need to be getting right in order for them to feel that they're developing, not only as an instructor, but as a person who's just genuinely interested in their pupils. Um, and it doesn't feel overwhelming. So the average length of our course is anywhere between 45 minutes and an hour, which is manageable, or certainly that's the feedback.
And even those are split into maybe 5 or 6 sections of 10 to 15-minute videos. So you can you're not just listening to an hour, you watch 5 or 10 minutes, and then you can take that in. There's some questions to answer at that point to see like what your key learning points are. And I like to point actually, and I hadn't even considered this, maybe, well, I'm sure we had a conversation about it at some point, but that the courses we've got up there are effectively what we think are the most important things that, like, if you do those things well, you're probably doing a lot of stuff well. And obviously we're going to add more courses and get a bit more niche and stuff as we go along, but we wanted to get those first few courses to be like, do this and you'll be on the right track. Yeah, and then sort of kind of obviously add in regular Zooms. I think particularly we've had quite a lot of good feedback about our sitting in the lesson videos, which is us effectively reviewing a lesson. But I think one thing that we've made sure we've done that's maybe slightly different to what I've seen before out there is it's not just watch the whole lesson and then get all the feedback at the end, because I think you can the issue there can sometimes be that you're hearing feedback and you've kind of already forgotten what actually happened in the moment. So something we do that, and again, it's about breaking it up in bite-sized chunks, is we jump into the lesson part way through and give you immediate feedback on what you've just heard. Or even actually I've done it on a couple of the videos where I jump in before something's about to happen and go, listen out for this. And I think that can be a really, like, I've enjoyed doing it, and from that point of view, and learning from that. And I think yeah, the feedback we've got is that people are loving those sort of kind of sitting in the lesson videos. Actually, if there's anyone listening that wants us to review one of their lessons for free and they're willing to let us use it on the course, send it over. And
Yeah, you get two trainers doing that, so that would be that would be brilliant for us. And we've got a bit of a queue of people waiting to do it, but it can the more the merrier. So happy to do that. It's nice though, because when you said about jumping in on the lesson, that's exactly what your trainers should be doing. Maybe not should be doing, but I think that when you have somebody watching your lesson in the back, it's great to encourage them to be involved in the lesson for the exact same reasons that you said, rather than waiting until the end of it. And that can be done in a nice way. Sometimes we feel that, somebody in the back is going to undermine us or do whatever. And that can be, with no fault of the trainers fault. It's just our preconceived ideas that if they have to step in, then I must be doing something wrong. It's not necessarily about that. It's just about developing your skills. And also, I think when you're not in that hot seat, it's so much easier just to see a way around. And you've referenced this before, where you're sat in the back, a conversation's happening in front of you, and you're like, they're not on the same page. It looks like they're talking about the same thing, they're not on the same page. And it just takes that outside person. There was one other thing that I wanted to say about Inspire that I thought was really important to mention. We have not and will never be the type of company that just talks at you about what we think you want to hear. We've already put a survey out asking people's opinions, finding out what's important to them. And actually, although we have put up courses that we feel are right and it's the foundation, we will now tweak some of the things that we will put up based on what our members are telling us. So some of those things obviously are having a live Zoom next week about managing pupils. In fact, managing their expectations, that communication, and making sure that um you are able to effectively manage their expectations around test, abilities, commitments, etc., etc. So it's about listening for us to our members and us adapting to what's current for them. I love the fact we do the accountability post as well, because we're almost speaking to the converted, because anybody listening to your podcast are committed to CPD, which is great, it's lovely. But it's holding yourself accountable, and I could be guilty of this. I have all these wonderful ideas where I think, right, I'm going to do that, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, but it's actually getting off your bum and doing it. And our weekly check-in and accountability posts, I think, are really helping people recognize that as well.
Yeah, and I think actually just to carry that on, first of all, I want to mention that anybody listening, that Zoom Diana was talking about isn't next week as you're listening. It was yesterday. So, but but actually, if you become a member, it will be live. It will be recorded and saved on the website. One of the things I was going to say, so you were talking about how we listen and how we have that interaction. So it isn't just this course of videos. And I love that it's not, because actually that wouldn't be me either. I don't want to just put stuff out there and have these people who we don't even know watching them necessarily. Like, this is about, it's about a mentorship. That's one of the first words we came up with. It was a mentorship, because we want to help people, but we want to, like, we're people and we want to help people, and it's that interactions that we have. And I think probably one of the benefits of that is that we have the Facebook group that is for members only, which means you end up having a group of very like-minded people who are all looking to support each other and join and progress and stuff. So you feel safe putting your accountabilities things up in that group, and you feel safe asking questions, and you're going to get a good answer. And I think that's one thing that I think has really helped with the membership. It starts to feel a bit of a community, and people start to get to know each other, and I'm hoping that will grow as we carry on as well. But I think from my perspective, it's nice because it means it's not just a person, a name that's signed up. It's actually someone we're interacting with and supporting, and that's what we want to do. Is we just want to support driving instructors to become the best driving instructor they can be.
Absolutely.
And
Love
I'm
it.
still working on doing that.
I'm still working on doing that. I think we all. I think if you stop working on doing that, it's now no longer the job for you.
Yeah.
It's, I constantly, maybe shouldn't lead with this, but I'm constantly going, my God, that was crap. Or because self-evaluation is going to be the biggest tool in your toolbox. Has to be. Because there's no way, and I hold myself too bloody high, as but it has to be achievable as well. You allow yourself these little blips, or these little I don't know, deviations of what you should be doing. But as long as you can reflect on it, evaluate, and change it in the future, then it wasn't a mistake. It was a learning opportunity. That's it.
That's what we tell our learners. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, no, definitely. And actually, I don't think there is anything wrong with having the massive goal of being the best and aiming for that perfect lesson or that perfect training session. I don't think there's anything wrong with having that, but you're right. Also, then it's having those manageable tasks within that to get you there. But there's nothing wrong with reaching for the stars, I think. So,
Yeah, I like that.
um, So, shall we move on and talk about our competency today? So, we're still this season we're going to still be working through the competencies, and I'm determined to get all the way through them. Today's competency that we're going to be talking about and this is the last one in the risk management section. Was sufficient feedback given to help the pupil understand any safety critical incidents? And before I pass over to you to give us your thoughts on this, I just want to read what the ADI 1 says, because it's only a short sort of kind of section, but I think it sums it up quite nicely. And actually, if there's anybody listening, well, first of all, I'd say listen to these podcasts because you get a good idea on it. But actually, even if you don't want to go through the entire ADI 1, just read the sort of first little section from the TVSA on each one, because it does give you quite a good summary of what they're expecting. I think if you had those each summary printed out, you'd probably have quite a good idea of what's expected from you going into a standard check or a part 3, or just for your driving lessons, because that's also important here, that it isn't just about the standard check or part 3. So the ADI 1 says, if a safety critical or potentially safety critical incident does occur, it is vital that the pupil fully understands what happened and how they could have avoided it or dealt with it better. Ideally, the pupil should be supported to analyze the situation for themselves, which I think is quite an important sentence. However, it may be necessary for the ADI or PDI to provide feedback if, for example, the pupil simply did not see the problem. That feedback should be given as soon as possible, as soon as practically possible after the incident.
Mhm.
Thoughts?
It kind of it says what it says on the tin, really. And often we get still this hangover about whether people can stop or not on their part threes or their standards check, because there was a period of time in the Zooms, what am I talking about? On the COVID. Oh, the COVID, whilst COVID was going on, that we couldn't pull over. And that was never really the case either, to be honest with you. They said they wanted a wheels moving lesson, but if you have just had a safety critical incident or a potentially, and I think that's really important to hear that word, it's on the first line. If a safety critical or potentially critical incident occurs, so it doesn't even have to have happened. It's that gut feel, and you've done your job, you've proactively stepped in, it's worth a conversation. Now, you know your pupil, you know what they're capable of, but you can also see what they're capable of in that moment and in that time. And I personally would probably pull over. That's not a one size fits all, because you can have a conversation on the move. Um, but it's if it's appropriate and if it's right for that pupil, and there's nothing wrong with you taking that time to almost recalibrate yourself and the pupil. Um, and that's what the examiner's looking for. They're looking for your ability to see what's right for them. Now, with the safety critical, I would always recommend that whatever agreed level of support you had, you now up it. You up it for the next 5 minutes until you get to a point where one, learning can take place, and two, both you and the pupil are able to, yeah, just recalibrate your thoughts and your feelings and your emotions, because just like in life, whenever we make a mistake, we spend that long thinking about what we've just done, we end up walking into another mistake. So I think that would be my sort of initial sort of thoughts. And for me, it's important that the pupil is able to understand what's happened, what were the consequences. And when I say consequences, advantages, disadvantages of how or what they've done. Um, and that can be hard if you have proactively stopped it, because they then don't necessarily see what might have happened. And I think it's really important that we as instructors help them understand that. Getting them to analyze it, getting them to come up with what might have happened if we hadn't stepped in, um, exploring what that looked like from an advantages and a disadvantages point of view, uh, and then finding solutions in the future. Now, when we have these conversations, even if you've proactively stopped it, and even if the pupil then gets it, they give you all the right answers and they say, yeah, I would have gone through the red light if you hadn't stopped me, or I'd have gone through the red light if you hadn't stepped in verbally, or what have you. I think it's really important that you go off then and test that. You test their ability to recognize those trigger points when when will you see the red light? What will it prompt you to do? If you don't see it, when do you want me to step in? And look for those solutions for them, because especially if they have the ability to delve into the consequences, you then just need to go off and put that into practice and make sure they can put it onto paper. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I'm gonna just add to that in that it's crucial to, and we talked about this on the Zoom last night actually. It's crucial to get to the core of the issue because that will give you the right solution. So I think just to reiterate again what you were saying in that it's crucial to have a solution and then go and put that solution into practice, because I think I see that a lot, where, and you, if you think about it, if you're not creating a solution and then going to practice it, you're basically an examiner. You're just pointing out faults. And you might have a bit of a conversation about why you shouldn't do that, but the examiners sometimes do that at the end as well. So it's crucial that we actually go, no, actually, we yeah, I get that you get it, but something still happened, and I want to know why. Like, what was going on in your mind? So if they get it, if they get that they, like your red light example is a really good example actually, because that's not going to be a lack of knowledge, is it? Like, what I have recently had a PDI tell me that people didn't know that red light meant stop. But they've been watching the Formula One, and all the red lights come on, and then they go out, and they were waiting for that to go out or something. I can't remember what the way they'd worked it out. But it had thrown them. But that's the first time in like 17 years I've heard that. So it's not likely to be a knowledge issue. So if they get they're supposed to stop at a red light, why didn't they, or why weren't they going to stop at the red light? And the answer to that question can be like a billion different reasons. So I think it's really important in that moment to dig into your pupil's mind. What was going on in their mind? What were they thinking about? What were they feeling? Because that can be causing the issue. Maybe there was an anxiety about a previous thing and that was distracting them from what was going on ahead or something like that. So that's the crucial bit, is find out what was going on there and then go fix that. So you might end up going to do something completely different to traffic lights, because traffic lights might not have been the issue. It might have been like, we're now going to go and deal with distractions, or maybe we're going to go deal with your anxiety of the thing before, so that you're not distracted next time you've done that. So it's, yeah, so find the core issue. And I think that's really my sort of kind of the crucial thing, because if you don't get that, your fix will either not work or be very temporary. And then, like you said, go and fix it, but not just have a conversation about it. Have a clear idea of what we're going to go and try to achieve on this next time we're trying something, and then go do it. And make that your new goal. I think we talk about, and I hear trainers talk about not wanting to be fault based and negative and stuff like that, and I get that, and it can be challenging, that, because we're also telling you that to not let stuff slide and go fix it. But the way you make that goal focused is you're now changing your goal and your focus to this new thing that you're trying to achieve. So it's no longer a fault thing. It's like, this is now our goal. Let's make it a positive. And I do find that if you go through a lesson, and I've seen this quite recently. I went through a lesson and there was bits and bobs happening as we're going along. Nothing really dramatic, like for a 2 hour lesson, but there was lots of just like, oh, okay, let's talk about that, and then we moved on, and let's talk about that, and then we moved on. It was a lot of that, and we got to the end of the lesson, and what ended up happening was we had a list of stuff we were going to go and do next week,
Mm.
and it was all the stuff that had gone wrong. And I was like, well, actually, if you'd have gone and made some of those your focus and the goal, and adapted the lesson, I suppose, which is different competency, but we've talked about before how they all link, and really sort of kind of delved into this safety critical incident and then gone and fixed it. And that's the important, go and fix it. That at the end of the lesson, the thing that went wrong, the I nearly ran someone over at a pedestrian crossing, is no longer the negative at the end of the lesson. They're no like, oh, I nearly ran that person over. It's the positive. It becomes I feel really confident at pedestrian crossings now because we spent 20, 30 minutes after that incident in working out why I'd done that. And now I don't feel like I'll do that again. And I think it's such a crucial thing for learning to drive, but it's also really like, I think from a business point of view, it's quite crucial because they end up sort of kind of leaving with these positives instead of all the stuff they couldn't do. And then when they get home and the person that's paying for their lessons potentially goes, how was your lesson? And they're like, well, I nearly ran a pedestrian over, I nearly went for a red light, versus them saying, well, this thing happened, but actually I really get it now. We learned it, and now I feel really confident about it. That's like a much better conversation to be having.
Definitely. And can I just add to that as well? Like basically, um, I think as well, it's really important that when you have that initial blip or something, has happened to get the heart racing, that we get to the core issue, but it's skills focused.
Mm.
And I'm going to take a guess. We haven't had this conversation, Phil, about, this lesson that you've sat in on. But when you analyze all the faults that happened throughout that lesson, I'm going to say it was based on the same skill.
Yeah, what's really hilarious is that was my feedback to the instructor. It was like I actually said to him, I said, I'm going to list, I think it was 5 or 6 incidents, and then I'm going to say what's the common factor. And they came, yeah, they were like, it was a combination of awareness and anticipation.
Yeah.
So either not seeing it or not predicting what could have happened.
Or maybe not seeing it, or experience of knowing where to look at the right period of time. And it might be interesting, actually. It might be interesting to list what those faults were, because the reason I'm saying that is I often get instructors say to me, I've had a pupil fail their test, and I've had 5 fails in a row, 5 seriouses. But they're all different things, Diana. They're all different things. So it mustn't be what I'm doing. And it'll be something like their approach speed to a junction was off. They were too fast. Or they then, in one instance, they were doing 30 and a 40. And I can't think of it anymore. Potential, yes, the meeting traffic situation. They got too close to the parked car. So there's 3 examples. I'm going to stop there before I run out. And then when I say to them, right, well, what actually happened? Why were these things happening? And they drill down to it, and generally it will come to one of the 5 skills. Now, I'll give you an example. Those 3 completely unrelated instances, and I'm not saying this was the case at the time because I've just made these up, but they were too fast at the junction because they didn't see the junction. They didn't see it. So when the examiner gave the instruction, I want you to take the second road on the left, they didn't see the second road on the left, therefore they were too fast. The fault gets marked as speed on approach, but it was an awareness issue. They couldn't see it. And the reason I'm going into this is I just don't think we link those things. The second one was doing 30 and a 40. They didn't see the change of speed sign. So they were doing what they believed was the correct speed limit. It gets marked as making progress. but the original fault comes from a lack of awareness. And my last one was the meeting traffic. They didn't see or they were maybe too focused on the oncoming car, didn't see the parked car that they were trying to avoid. So it was awareness, probably planning as well. So and it's that I love having those conversations with instructors because they just get it then. They go, "Oh my God, I get it. It's the skills and not the subjects." So I think it's really important that we do that in lessons so that the pupil can then evaluate which skill they need to develop. And I think actually that makes the whole process less scary as well, because if you've got, as you've said, a whole list of driving faults, then that's quite daunting. A bit like what we said earlier about the courses on Inspire. If you've got this massive 3 hour course that you've got to sit down, or even 2 hours, you're like, I don't have time for that. So it's helping them manage it. It's 5 skills. So awareness, anticipation, planning, car control, and judgment. And with that, once you get one, it is so easily to transfer into the different topics, and it just makes it feel more manageable.
Yeah, yeah, no, definitely. And I think we get one about the 5 skills all the time because they're amazing. And they really work, and it does really filter through your lessons. And it was my feedback to that instructor, even to the point where I think like I was talking about the pedestrian crossing scenario was the first incident, and then I think if we'd have made the lesson now about it wasn't even an awareness issue. Actually, they'd seen the pedestrian, but they hadn't anticipated them turning and crossing the road. And I think if we'd have made the lesson about anticipating as we went through, there was an incident later on where we were going, it was meeting traffic, we had priority, but you couldn't see round the bend. So you had no idea if anyone was already committed into the gap. So that's an anticipation, like what could be in that space that we can't see. And I think if we'd have been having that conversation about if we'd have linked the anticipation to the meeting traffic, because I think meeting traffic was something they wanted to go and have a look at anyway, that incident wouldn't have happened. It would have been a case of there would have been either the learning would have already taken place and therefore the pupil would have anticipated it, or they would have been having the conversations about it and therefore the pupil would have anticipated it. And it's like you can see how by just using that skill, it would have improved the whole drive, and the pupil would have really learned from it, I suppose.
Yeah. I have the other thing I wanted to suggest, and this comes up time and time again. Two things actually that I want to suggest. Although we want the pupil to come up with the solutions or the reasons why things have happened, 100% that's my go-to. If they genuinely have no idea, then it is okay for us to give them a menu of choices on why they think it might have happened. Well, shall we go off and explore this? Could this have been the case? And give them some options. Say, in my experience, only after you've explored it with them, in my experience, these are some of the common factors. It might not be what's caused it with you, might not be, therefore, the solution might not be right. But out of these, what one is resonating with you? Should we prioritize that and see if that's going to fix it? And it's involving them in that process so that it's not us just dictating what it is they need to do in the moment.
I think that also gets them used to, like, if they struggle to give the answer, but by giving them these options, they get used to being part of the process, and then further down the line they're more likely you may not need to give them those options because they're more likely to give you their opinion in the first place. The other thing though, that when you give these list of things, you're right, it might not be the thing that they did, but it might trigger a thought in their mind for them to go, oh, it's not quite that, but it's kind of that, but this, and now you've got your answer. So it can definitely help. I just want to have a quick look through the positives here that the examiners are looking for within this competency, because it kind of explains everything. We've covered a lot of it, I think, with this. So one of the positives they're looking for is find a safe place to stop and examine the critical incident, which we've talked about. And Absolutely. Absolutely do that. But also, I think, again, this goes back to linking competencies. This is all about, was the area suitable as well? Because when you are choosing your area or deciding where you're going to go and practice, you need to have in your mind, where would I stop if I need to have a conversation? As part of planning your area that you're training in, is having suitable places to pull over. Otherwise, you end up driving for ages and not able to have these conversations. And then by the time you pull over, no one can remember what's happening. So next one was allowing the pupil time to express any fears and concerns the incident might have caused. So that's within the conversations we've just had, but something we talked about again last night on our Zoom was shutting up long enough so the pupil can have their say and really sort of digging into their thoughts and their feelings of what's going on. And yeah, so crucial that you just ask those questions and then be quiet, basically, and let the pupil have time and even dig into what they've said as well. So don't just accept that first answer, like ask for more, because they might not be done. So yeah, digging into that. Support your pupil to reflect clearly about what happened, which we've talked about. Provide provide an input to clarify aspects of the incident that the pupil does not understand, and that's what you just said about you can add something. That I add to that a little bit is, if I add any information to the process, whether it's a fact or a bit of technical information or a bit of advice, what I always do is get the pupil to analyze what I've just said, and not just take it as read. So I might say, what do you think about that? Or what do you think the advantages of that are, or the disadvantages of that? So by getting them to analyze it, one, they buy into it because they see the positives, but two, they remember it because they've had to analyze it rather than just remembering something that I've said. And then you don't end up having those conversations next week going, I told you this last week. And not that I would say that, but that you get that feeling like, oh, I told you this last week. If you've got them to analyze it and think through it, you won't be having those conversations very often because they will have processed it rather than trying to remember it.
That happens a lot with the mirrors, doesn't it? It's the whole the people that I had today she was like, I keep forgetting to check the mirrors. I was like, we do like to bang on about them, don't we? And she was like, yeah. And actually we had a lovely conversation, a really lovely conversation. It just sort of mirrors what you said there. Because I'd asked her, if you were to tell me how to do this junction or this, we were actually doing roundabouts, but they're dead quiet roundabouts, and there's hardly any cars on it and all the rest of it. And I said, what would be the very first thing you did? And fair play to her, she said, slow down. And she went, check my mirrors. And I said, right, okay. I said, which one of them would make sense to do first? And to be fair to her, she said mirrors. I was like, do you know why though? And she went, no. And I was like, right, okay. And it was just so that example wasn't quite safety critical because, of course, I'm absolutely taking, I'm not allowing full responsibility for observation skills because I'll always have our back. But I think it's so important that they understand, like you said, why we're asking them to do something or suggesting it, because their ability to self-evaluate. I said this yesterday as well. It's also merging into one sometimes our advice, because just like teaching our pupils to learn to drive, it's the same thing. It's the same thing over and over again, the same faults, from instructors and pupils. But self-evaluation from the pupil's behalf is going to save their life and stop them from crashing in the future, because they'll be able, when they make those little blips, they will be able to evaluate what part in it that they played and then put preventative measures in the future. I'm not going to give the example.
Don't tell that story.
Oh. because there was a very personal example, not with me, but a family member. And because this podcast is public, I am not going to. So if you want to know what that example is, you should sign up.
And just going back to what you were saying about like us banging on about mirrors, I think that's quite crucial to this. In have we found the right solution? If we're banging on, have we found the right, is banging on the right solution? Like that's the key. Because like if it's not working, don't keep doing it. Like find a different conversation, find a different way to go about it. Is it is it potentially, is it the mirrors that are the issue? And that goes back to what we are talking about with the having the core issue here. I told the story yesterday on the Zoom about a pupil who I'd done a mock test for, was brilliant with their mirrors for the entire test, apart from one traffic light roundabout. And so mirrors isn't that person's issue. The traffic light roundabout was that person's issue. And what we needed to do was increase their competence on the traffic light roundabout so that they had the brain space to check their mirrors. And so maybe that's something to be considering, that if a pupil is always not checking their mirrors, is it because they're too busy concentrating on other stuff at that point? And so therefore, do we need to support them with that while they focus on whatever they're focusing? Or do we need to support them with the other thing so they can focus on the mirrors? And it's finding that right level and that right solution for that pupil, rather than just banging on about the mirrors. Not saying that's what you were doing. I'm just like,
Yeah, it was my very first lesson with her. But
yeah.
yeah, 100% right. 100%.
Okay, I'm going to wrap it up there, if nothing else, because I've got another podcast in about 15 minutes. So, yeah, thank you. Well, I normally give people the opportunity to say where you can find them. So where can you find us?
So you can find us at inspireinstructortraining.com. We have our website. We are on Facebook. We are on Instagram.
So as with last season, and I have not warned you about this, we are doing a top tip at the end of every episode. You've already done one of these because you're the only person to have been on the podcast twice. And what would your current top tip be for driving instructors?
Make sure you evaluate on your lessons. And if you see the opportunity to fix something, don't try and fix everything. Choose one thing to prioritize. Because if you try and change everything, a bit like starting a diet and going to the gym in January, it's going to fail if you're doing too much at the same time. Just start the diet or just start the gym. Do one thing, then introduce some of the other fixes.
Nice. And I'm taking you're talking there about instructors evaluating their own
Yes.
performance. Yeah. That's quite interesting because I've recently done that in the fact that I have since, so we're like it just coming into February, and my focus was be consistent at the gym, and now I feel like I've got that. My next focus is be consistent with diet. So I literally did that. I split it into two, quite deliberately. So yeah, that's a nice top tip that I've taken on.
Well, I am going to, in March, join the gym. Let's see if this happens so you can keep me accountable. But I'm just going to join the gym and eat like a fat pig. So, and then I will introduce the diet when I'm feeling up to it.
Yeah, well, the beauty of it is that and we've turned into a fitness podcast now, but the beauty of this is that but it does apply to instructing, is that once that becomes a habit, it means you don't need to focus on it. It doesn't take as much willpower, and willpower is like a muscle. It goes away after a while and it tires. So it doesn't take as much willpower, but that can apply in the car in the sense that if you're trying 3 or 4 new techniques because you've been on a workshop, it takes a lot of muscle and brain power to do those, and so then it feels like they're not working, or they struggle and they go away. So yeah, pick one thing, nail that until you can't not nail it, and then move on and try the next thing. Okay, brilliant. Thank you very much. Inspire Instructor Podcast, where the learning never stops.